Okay, so picture this. There's something like 20,000 different bee species described around the world. You probably think of the classic honeybee, right? Fuzzy, lives in a hive. But here's the thing that gets me: most of those species, the vast majority, they're actually solitary. They live alone, no big colonies.
That's exactly right. It's kind of counterintuitive, isn't it? When we talk about the bees that build these huge perennial colonies, the ones doing large-scale pollination, making lots of honey, well, we're actually talking about a tiny, very visible minority. And today, we're doing a deep dive into a really fascinating group within that minority, the stingless bees.
Specifically, we're zooming in on Indonesia, this incredible chain of islands. It's not just volcanoes and beautiful beaches. Turns out it's this massive critical hub for bee diversity. The big idea we're tackling today is that Indonesia actually has the greatest diversity of social bees in all of Asia, and particularly these stingless bees, the meloponi, scientifically speaking.
Yeah, and our mission, if you like, is to kind of unpack why. Why this specific region? What makes it such an evolutionary hotspot? We also need to look at the, frankly, pretty huge gaps in what we know, especially about the Eastern Islands, and then connect all that amazing biodiversity to, well, a growing industry called meloponiculture. It's fascinating how, tiny details of a bee's anatomy can link directly to potentially big economic opportunities.
Okay, let's get into that biodiversity. It's pretty staggering. Maybe start with the bees. Most people know honeybees, the genus Apis. Even here, Indonesia seems special.
Oh, absolutely. It sets the stage perfectly.
Yeah.
So globally, there are only 7 recognized species of true honeybee apis. That's it. Now, consider this. 5 of those 7 species are found across the Indonesian archipelago. 5 out of 7. That's more than any other single region on the planet. It immediately flags Indonesia as really important for bee evolution.
5 out of 7. Wow, that alone is impressive. But then we shift to the stingless bees, the meloponi, and the numbers just explode, don't they?
They really do. Worldwide, we're talking about roughly 500 species of stingless bees, so way more diverse than apis. And crucially, like honeybees, they store food as honey, which of course makes them interesting to people. Now, if we look just at Indonesia, the current count is 46 recorded species of stingless bees. And here's the kicker. Every single known Asiatic genus of meloponi is found there. It's the absolute center for this group in Asia.
46 species, every known Asian genus. That's not just a cool fact for entomologists. It's the foundation for something potentially huge, this meloponiculture you mentioned.
Exactly. Meloponiculture, it's basically the farming or management of these stingless bee colonies. And it's taking off globally. You see major industries popping up from South America to Australia. And what's really important is that it often directly involves and benefits indigenous communities. These communities often have, centuries of traditional knowledge and cultural practices tied to these specific bees. The potential for Indonesia to tap into this natural wealth seems enormous.
Yeah, but there's a catch, isn't there? You can't really manage or build an industry around something if you don't fully know what's out there or where it is. That brings us to the knowledge gaps.
That's the crux of the problem. If you look at where the research has actually happened, where the records are, it's heavily, heavily biased. You see this big concentration of data points on the large Western islands, Sumatra, Java, Kalimantan, and then further down the list, Sulawesi.
So basically where it's easier to get to and where more people live, which means this figure of 46 species, it's likely just a starting point, right? This sampling bias must be skewing the whole picture.
It absolutely is. Researchers are pretty upfront about this, that 46 number. Almost certainly an underestimate. Because our understanding of the stingless bee fauna outside those few Western islands is, well, it's often described as rudimentary, or sometimes it's just completely blank. This really limits our ability to grasp the true scale of Indonesia's biodiversity and its global significance.
What I find really striking in the research is the kind of urgency. Scientists are specifically calling out the need to get out there and survey the eastern half of Indonesia. It's like a call to action for discovery.
It really is. They actually list specific areas. They say intensive sampling is urgently needed in the Lesser Sunday Islands and across that whole complex network of islands called Maluku.
And within Maluku, they get really specific, don't they? It highlights just how much unexplored territory there is. They mention Halmahera, Bacan, the Sula Islands, Obi, Buru, Seram, the Aru Islands, Barat Daya Islands, Tanimbar Islands.
Exactly. It reads less like a map and more like a future research plan. And that points to the real bottleneck. Progress is being held back by 2 main things. First, just a basic lack of understanding of what species actually live on many of these islands. And second, there's a shortage of good resources guides for actually identifying the bees you find. If local researchers or conservationists can't reliably tell species A from species B, well, progress just stalls.
Right. And that lack of identification tools is exactly why the resource we've been looking at, this illustrated key, is so important. It's designed to tackle that fundamental problem using the latest classifications from 2017. Because you can't conserve what you can't identify, and you certainly can't build a sustainable industry around it.
Precisely. And when we talk about identification, we're diving into the world of morphology, tiny physical details. Now, stingless bees are corbiculate bees, like honeybees and bumblebees. That means they have those pollen baskets, the corbicula, on their hind legs. That's the shared family trait.
Okay, and the most obvious difference is the stingless part. They have a reduced sting. But for scientists creating these detailed keys, what are the less obvious but maybe more important distinguishing features?
It often comes down to evolutionary trade-offs, you could say, especially related to flight and how they collect pollen. They tend to have reduced venation in their forewings, fewer or fainter veins near the tips. And they've lost certain structures on their hind legs that their cousins have. Specifically, they lack tibial spurs, and they don't have an auricle that little lobe honeybees use to help push pollen up into the basket.
Wait, hold on. Why are those things losing the auricle and spurs significant? Does that mean they collect pollen differently than a honeybee?
That's a great question. Yeah, probably does. The absence of the auricle might suggest they handle pollen differently. Maybe they specialize in finer grains or pack it in another way. And the simpler claws, the reduced wing veins, it could point towards adaptations for maybe flight agility or efficiency, as opposed to the sort of heavy lifting flight of a larger honeybee. These aren't just random differences. They define the whole Melipone tribe. They're fundamental characteristics.
Okay, so those are the big picture differences. Now let's zoom way in. To tell different genera or species apart, you need some serious microscopic detail, right? The kind of stuff that's crucial for conservation planning.
Oh, absolutely. We're talking tiny measurements. For instance, a major split in the identification key separates groups based on foring length. Is it less than 3 millimeters or typically over 4 millimeters? A millimeter difference can separate entire evolutionary lineages. It's incredible.
That precision is amazing. And looking even closer at the wing veins themselves, the sources mention things like nebulous vein traces. What on earth does that mean if you're trying to ID a bee?
Nebulous just means sort of cloudy or indistinct. The vein is there, but it's not strongly hardened or colored. So if you're looking at a genus like, say, Lysodragona, its wing venation is described as greatly reduced. You might only see faint outlines, like ghosts of veins. Other genera might have traces that are slightly brownish. Those are the nebulous veins. It's these subtle differences, invisible to the naked eye, that help separate groups. They tell an evolutionary story.
And then you get features like the malar space. That's the gap between the bottom of the eye and where the jaw hinges, right? For one genus, Peritrigona, this space is apparently much longer than the width of the antenna segment. Why would that tiny facial measurement matter to anyone outside a lab?
Well, think about it. A longer malar space could mean a slightly larger head capsule overall, or maybe stronger jaw muscles. That might relate to nest defense, or what materials they can chew to build nests, or even what kinds of flowers they can access, maybe flowers with deeper tubes. So that tiny distance could separate a species that's easy to manage and produces valuable honey from one that's difficult or less productive. Suddenly, taxonomy becomes very practical, potentially very economic.
Okay, I see. It connects the micro detail to real-world function and value. And there's similar detail on the legs too, right? The inner surface of the hind tibia.
Yes, the hind leg is critical. Researchers look at the main hairy patch, the paratrichiate zone, and how it meets the smooth area next to it. Is there a gentle slope, a gentle clivulus, or is it a sharp drop-off? An abrupt clivulus. These tiny anatomical features help define the species, and each species, defined by these details, likely has its own unique ecological role, its own niche in the rainforest. This detailed taxonomy is the absolute bedrock for everything else: conservation, study, potential industry.
It's really something, realizing how much careful work goes into creating a tool like that identification key that lets someone confidently say, okay, this isn't just any stingless bee, this is Peritrigona species X. And knowing that ID has real consequences, especially when we circle back to Melipona culture.
The consequences are potentially massive. We know from other parts of the world, like Central and South America, that indigenous knowledge is incredibly valuable here. In places like Mexico, local communities have understood stingless bees, their habits, their cycles, their preferred flowers for generations. And that knowledge has underpinned sustainable management systems that benefit people culturally and economically.
But the sources highlight something crucial and maybe a bit worrying about Indonesia. It seems that indigenous knowledge and traditional uses of stingless bees there haven't really been documented or studied properly yet.
That's right. And it feels like a huge missed opportunity, maybe even a failure, to recognize the value of that local expertise.
Hmm.
The scientific work, like surveying those eastern islands, really needs to go hand in hand with documenting the ethnoentomology, the human knowledge of these insects. Because building a truly successful, sustainable melaponiculture industry, well, it needs way more than just the species list.
So you need to link the taxonomy, that key we discussed, with broader ecological and cultural understanding.
Exactly. You need the detailed distribution maps. You need to understand their nesting biology. Where do they nest? What kind of cavities? How do they build their nests? You need to know about their life cycles, their larvae, and critically, their floral associations. Which specific plants do they rely on for pollen and nectar? That deep ecological knowledge is absolutely essential for any kind of sustainable harvesting or effective colony management.
It's about understanding the whole ecosystem, not just the bee itself. And if researchers can bridge these knowledge gaps, provide the ID tools, document the ecology and local knowledge, then the economic potential, given Indonesia's sheer diversity, seems immense.
That's the conclusion drawn in the research. With this incredible diversity, 46 stingless bee species recorded so far, likely more, plus those 5 apis species, Indonesia is, and I quote, poised to have a robust industry in melaponiculture. The raw biological capital is there.
Wow, that's a powerful mix of science, conservation urgency, and economic possibility, all wrapped up in these tiny insects.
And maybe one last thought, sort of a bigger picture idea for you to consider. Indonesia's location on the globe is unique. It's not just a collection of islands, it's a bridge. Geographically, it sits right between the distinct fauna of Southeast Asia to the west and the Papuasian fauna to the east. It straddles that famous biological dividing line, the Wallace Line.
Which means the research happening now, especially in those remote eastern islands, it isn't just about listing Indonesian species. It's fundamental to understanding bee evolution across two completely different major biogeographical realms.
Precisely. The potential for discovery there is just enormous. Think about areas that are still barely surveyed, like West Papua. What undiscovered species are there? What ecological interactions? What local knowledge is waiting to be understood? The global story of stingless bee evolution, and maybe even social bee evolution generally, isn't complete until Indonesia's biodiversity is fully mapped. That process of discovery is very much still happening.